Pakistan, a Hard Country. Chapter 1. Introduction. Understanding Pakistan. And yet it moves. There have been times during the writing of this book when it seemed that it would have to be titled Requiem for a Country. At the time of writing, the pressures on Pakistan from without and within are unprecedented, even in its troubled history. Yet such despair would be premature. Tariq Ali wrote, "Can Pakistan survive?" The death of a state in 1983, a generation ago. That's quite a long deathbed scene by any standards. It is possible that terrible floods of the summer of 2010 have fundamentally changed and weakened the Pakistani system described in this book. This, however, will not be clear for a long while. And in the meantime, it is worth remembering the extraordinary resilience that South Asian rural societies have often showed in the face of natural disaster, from which they have repeatedly emerged with structures of local authority and political culture essentially unchanged. What is certainly true is that if floods and other ecological disasters on this scale become regular events as a result of climate change, then Pakistan will be destroyed as a state and as an organized society. But so too will be many other countries around the world. Indeed, such a development will reduce present concerns about Pakistan to relative insignificance. In the meantime, however, the floods have obviously damaged Pakistan's national infrastructure and retarded still further the country's already faltering economic progress. This book is intended to describe and analyze both Pakistan's internal problems and the sources of Pakistan's internal resilience. In consequence, it, of course, deals extensively with the threat from Pakistani Taliban and their allies, the roots of their support, and the relationship of this support to the war in Afghanistan. It also examines the policies of the Pakistani security establishment towards Afghanistan and India, since these have had very important effects on domestic developments in Pakistan. Not meant, however, to be a study of Pakistan's international position, though the conclusions contain some recommendations for Western policy. Trying to understand Pakistan's internal structures and dynamics is complicated, for if there is one phrase which defines many aspects of Pakistan and its central theme of this book, it is Janus-faced. In other words, many of the same features of Pakistan's state and government which are responsible for holding Islamist extremism in check are at one and the same time responsible for holding back Pakistan's social, economic and political development. Pakistan is divided, disorganized, economically backward, corrupt, violent, unjust, often savagely oppressive towards the poor and women, home to extremely dangerous forms of extremism and terrorism. And yet, it moves, in many ways surprisingly tough and resilient as a state and a society. It is also not quite as unequal as it looks from outside. Pakistan contains islands of successful modernity and of excellent administration. Not that many, but enough to help keep the country trundling along. A few impressive modern industries, some fine motorways, a university in Lahore, parts of which are best of their kind in South Asia, a powerful, well-trained, well-disciplined army, and in every generation, a number of efficient, honest, and devoted public servants. The military and police commanders of the fight against the Taliban in Pathan areas, whom I met in Peshawar and Rawalpindi in 2008 and 9, struck me as highly able and patriotic men by any standards in the world. The National Finance Commission Award of 2010, which rebalanced state revenues in favor of the poorer provinces, was a reasonable if belated agreement. It demonstrated that Pakistani democracy, the Pakistani political process, and Pakistani federalism retain a measure of vitality, flexibility, and the ability to compromise. One of these things is characteristic of truly failed or failing states like Somalia, Afghanistan, or the Congo. That doesn't mean that Pakistan always smells nice, though it does sometimes. And indeed, some of the toughest creepers holding the rotten tree of Pakistani system together are at one and the same time parasites on that tree, and sometimes smell bad even by their own standards. Nonetheless, though they are, and unless the USA, India or both together invade Pakistan and thereby precipitate its disintegration, the likelihood is that country will hold together. And if it eventually collapses, it will not be Islamist extremism but climate change, an especially grim threat in whole of South Asia that it finishes it off. support for extremist and terrorist groups is scattered throughout Pakistani society. But as of 2010, mass support for Islamist rebellion against the Pakistani state is so far present only in Pathan areas and only in some of them. In other words, less than 5% of the Pakistani population. That is not remotely enough to revolutionize Pakistan as a whole. During the rule over the region, the British faced repeated revolts in Pathan areas without seriously fearing that this would lead to rebellion elsewhere in their Indian empire. Any Pakistani national revolution would have to gain not just mass but majority support in Pakistan's two great urban centers, Lahore and Karachi, as the chapters on Punjab and Sindh will make it clear. This is unlikely for the foreseeable future, though not necessarily forever, especially if ecological crises, floods and cities with masses of starving peasants. When terrorist groups attack India or Western forces in Afghanistan, their actions enjoy a degree of instinctive gut sympathy from a majority of Pakistanis, not because of Islamist extremism, but because of Muslim nationalism and bitter hostility to the US role in the Muslim world in general and Pakistan's region in particular. Support for civil war and revolution in Pakistan itself that would turn Pakistan into a revolutionary Islamic state is, however, a different matter from sympathizing with attacks on US and India. It would mean Pakistanis killing Pakistanis on a massive scale, and by and large, they don't want to. They may well want to kill some set of immediate rivals, but that's another matter. It is important not to be misled by the spread of terrorism in Pakistan in 2009 to 2010. In many ways, terrorism by Pakistani Taliban is a sign not of strength but of weakness. If you want to overthrow or capture a state, you need either a mass movement on city streets that seizes institutions or a guerrilla movement in the countryside that seizes territory or a revolt of junior ranks of the military or some combination of all three. No movement relying chiefly on terrorism have ever overthrown a state. The Pakistani Taliban looked truly menacing when it took over most of the federally administered tribal areas, FOTA, followed by districts of Swat and Bunair. When it blows up ordinary people in bazaars and mosques, it merely looks foul. Pakistan is thus probably still far from the situation of Iran in the late 1970s or Russia in 1917. Apart from anything else, the army is a united and disciplined institution. As long as that remains the case, it will be strong enough to defeat open revolt, as it proved by defeating the Taliban in Swat and South Waziristan in 2009. In Africa and elsewhere, military coups in Pakistan have always been carried out by army as a whole, on the orders of its chief of staff and commanding generals, never by junior officers. As my chapter on military will describe, there are very deep reasons for this in terms of material advantage as well as military culture. The thing that can destroy this discipline and unity is if enough Pakistani soldiers are faced with moral and emotional pressures powerful enough to crack the discipline, and that would mean very powerful pressures indeed. In fact, they would have to be put in a position where the duty to defend Pakistan and their conscience and honor as Muslims clash directly with their obedience to their commanders. As far as I can see, the only thing that could bring about as far as the army as a whole is concerned, rather than just some of the Pathan element, is if the US were able to invade part of Pakistan and the army command failed to give orders to resist it. The perceived subservience of Pakistani state to Washington's demand has caused severe problems of morale in armed forces. I have been told by the soldiers of all ranks, faced with open incursions on the ground by US troops, parts of the Pakistani army with mutiny in order to fight the invaders. With the army splintered and radicalized, Islamist upheaval and the collapse of state would indeed be all too likely. And then the result would be rebellions leading to civil war, not as in Iran to a national revolution that would be successful in taking over the whole country. I hope through this book to strengthen the argument that however great the provocation, the US must not contribute to the destruction of Pakistan, even though, as this book will make clear, neither the Pakistani army, nor the Pakistani state, nor the great majority of Pakistanis will ever give more than very qualified help to the US campaigns against Afghan Taliban, since Pakistanis of every rank and class see these in a quite different light from Al-Qaeda and Pakistani Taliban.